The coffee shop was buzzing with the usual Tuesday morning crowd when Marcus Chen walked in, shaking raindrops from his jacket. At 43, he'd grown comfortable with his routine. Same corner table, same black coffee, same 20 minutes of peace before heading to his architecture firm downtown. What he didn't expect was for his entire world to shift because of a woman. Reading a book about quantum physics while wearing bright purple sneakers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She looked up when he accidentally bumped her chair, and their eyes met for the first time. That's when he made the comment that would change everything. You can't be 60. Her response? Smile that could light up the entire Pacific Northwest, followed by words that knocked him completely off balance. And you can't be this handsome, so we're even. This is the story of how two people discovered that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them, and how age becomes just a number when you find someone who sees the world the same way you do. Marcus had always been the type of person who noticed details. It came with the territory of being an architect, the way light fell across surfaces, how spaces made people feel, the small imperfections that either ruined a design or made it perfect. But somehow he'd completely missed noticing Elena Vasquez, sitting at the table next to his usual spot for the past 3 weeks. She was there every Tuesday and Thursday morning at exactly 8:15, always with a different book, always with the same cup of chamomile tea with honey, and always wearing those impossible indoor purple sneakers that seemed to glow against the coffee shop's muted earth tones. Her silver hair was cut in a sleek bob that framed her face perfectly. She had this way of underlining passages in her books with a fountain pen that made the softest scratching sound against the paper. The first time Marcus really actually saw her, was when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his business partner about a client meeting that had been moved up by 2 hours. He stood quickly, grabbing his messenger bag and laptop, and in his haste, his elbow caught the back of her chair. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he said, turning to apologize properly. That's when she looked up from her book, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the color of dark honey, with laugh lines that spoke of decades of joy and wisdom. But it was her smile that completely undid him, genuine, warm, and somehow both knowing and mysterious at the same time. "Oh, harm done," she said, her voice carrying just the hint of an accent that made Marcus think of summer evenings and conversations that lasted until dawn. "Though you might want to slow down before you take out the entire coffee shop." Marcus laughed, a real laugh that surprised him with its spontaneity. "You're probably right. I've been told I move through the world like I'm constantly late for something important. Are you?" she asked, closing her book but keeping her finger tucked between the pages to mark her place. "Late for something important? I mean..." The question caught him off guard. Was he? Marcus thought about his calendar, packed with meetings and deadlines. His apartment that felt more like a hotel room. The last time he'd had a conversation with someone that wasn't about work or logistics. "I honestly don't know anymore," he admitted. She studied his face for a moment, and Marcus had the strangest feeling that she could see right through all the careful walls he'd built around himself. "Well," she said finally, "at least you're honest about it. That's more than most people manage before their second cup of coffee." Marcus glanced at his watch and realized that for the first time in months, he didn't care about being exactly on time. "Marcus, by the way. Marcus Chen." "Elena Vasquez," she replied, extending a hand that was warm and sure in his. "Before you ask, yes. The quantum physics book is for pleasure, not torture." He looked down at the time in her lap, The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene, and felt his eyebrows rise. Pleasure reading? Most people would choose something a little less dense. Elena's laugh was like music, rich and full of life. Most people my age are reading romance novels about young love and happily ever after. I prefer my entertainment. To bend my brain a little, that's when Marcus made his fatal mistake. Looking at her smooth skin, her bright eyes, the energy that seemed to radiate from her like heat from a fireplace, he said without thinking, "You can't be 60. The words hung in the air between them for a moment, and Marcus immediately wanted to take them back. He'd just committed the cardinal sin of commenting on a woman's age, and with someone he'd literally just met. But instead of being offended, Elena's smile grew wider, and her eyes sparkled with what looked suspiciously like mischief. "And you can't be this handsome," she said, tilting her head slightly as she looked at him, "so we're even." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, something that hadn't happened since he was 16, and Jessica Martinez had told him she liked his new haircut. That's not. I didn't mean ... Relax, Elena said, her voice gentle but amused. "I'm exactly 62 years old as of last month, and I take it as a compliment that you think I can't be. Though I have to say, your reaction to being called handsome is absolutely adorable." "Don't get called handsome very often," Marcus admitted, then immediately regretted the admission. Way to sound pathetic, he thought. "Well, that's clearly a failure of observation on the part of the people in your life," Elena said matter-of-factly. "You have excellent bone structure, kind eyes, and you dress like someone who actually looks in the mirror before leaving the house. Trust me, at 62, I've seen enough men to know the difference between handsome and merely acceptable." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. In his 43 years, he'd received exactly 3 genuine compliments on his appearance. One from his mother, one from his ex-wife, before they were married, and one from a client who'd had too much wine at a gallery opening. This stranger, this woman who read quantum physics for fun and wore purple sneakers like they were perfectly normal footwear, had just delivered more genuine praise in 30 seconds than he'd received in the past 5 years. "Your phone is buzzing," Elena observed, nodding toward the device in his hand that he'd completely forgotten about. Marcus glanced at the screen and saw 3 missed calls from his partner, David, and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. "About the client meeting, I really do have to go," he said, genuinely reluctant for the first time in recent memory. "Of course you do," Elena said, opening her book again. "The world of architecture waits for no one." "How did you know I'm an architect?" She pointed to his messenger bag where his business cards were visible in the front pocket. "Chen & Associates Sustainable Design Solutions. It's either you're an architect, or you're really committed to an elaborate cover story." Marcus laughed again, surprised by how easy it was to laugh with her, guilty as charged. "Though Sustainable Design Solutions makes it sound more impressive than it actually is. I doubt that," Elena said. "Anyone who moves through the world with that kind of purposeful energy is probably doing something more important than they give themselves credit for." Marcus's phone buzzed again, and this time Elena gestured toward the door. "Go, you're important. Thing is calling, will you? Would it be weird if I hope to see you here again?" The question tumbled out before Marcus could stop it, and he immediately felt like a teenager asking someone to prom. Elena's smile was answer enough. But she said, "I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday at 8:15. I'll be the one reading something that most people would consider inappropriately challenging for someone my age." "I'll remember that," Marcus said, backing toward the door and nearly colliding with someone carrying a tray of coffee. Tuesday and Thursday at 8:15, and Marcus, Elena called after him. "Maybe next time slow down enough to actually taste your coffee. Life's too short to rush through the good parts." Marcus walked out of that coffee shop feeling like he'd been hit by lightning, but in the best possible way. For the first time in months, the city looked different somehow, brighter, more alive, full of possibilities he hadn't noticed before. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds, casting everything in a golden glow that made him think of Elena's eyes. The client meeting went better than expected, partly because Marcus was in such an unexpectedly good mood that his usual anxiety about presentations simply didn't materialize. David noticed immediately. "Okay, what happened to you?" David asked as they walked back to their office after successfully landing a contract for a new mixed-use development in Pioneer Square. "You were actually charming there. It's like genuinely charming. Not your usual competent, but slightly terrifying professional persona." Marcus and David had been business partners for 8 years and friends for longer than that. Graduate school, bonded over late-night design studios and too much caffeine, and somehow managed to build a successful firm together without killing each other. If anyone would notice a change in Marcus's demeanor, it would be David. "I met someone," Marcus said, surprising himself with the admission. David stopped walking and stared at him. You met someone? Like someone? A person you're attracted to who isn't a potential client or a building? When you put it like that, it sounds pretty pathetic. It doesn't sound pathetic. It sounds miraculous, David said, resuming his walk, but keeping his eyes on Marcus. You haven't shown interest in another human being since Sharon moved to Portland 2 years ago. Even that was more like polite interest than actual attraction. Sharon had been a nice woman, a landscape architect who understood the demands of their profession and didn't mind Marcus's tendency to work late and think about projects in his sleep. They'd dated for 6 months in what Marcus now recognized as the most lukewarm relationship of his adult life. When she got a job offer in Portland, they'd parted ways with handshakes and promises to stay in touch that neither of them had kept. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This is different, Marcus said, and even as the words came out of his mouth, he knew how inadequate they were to describe what had happened in that coffee shop. Different how? David pressed, holding the door to their building open for a woman struggling with a stroller. Marcus thought about Elena's smile. The way she'd called him handsome like it was simply a fact rather than flattery, her purple sneakers, and her quantum physics book and the feeling that she could see right through him to something he'd forgotten existed. She's 62, he said finally. David nearly tripped over his own feet. 62? Marcus, you're 43? That's almost a 20-year age gap. I know how math works, David, do you? 'Cause I'm starting to wonder. You meet one woman who's nice to you, and suddenly you're ready to throw away the concept of appropriate age ranges. They were in the elevator now, and Marcus could see his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked the same as always, dark hair that was just starting to show gray at the temples, brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a face that his mother had always called distinguished and his ex-wife had called serious. But something was different, something in his expression that he couldn't quite identify. It's not like that, Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure what it was like. I just... She was interesting, really interesting and funny. Like maybe I've been sleepwalking through my life without realizing it. David was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus's face with the same intensity he usually reserved for structural engineering problems. Okay, he said finally. Tell me about her. So Marcus did. He told David about Elena's purple sneakers and her quantum physics book, about the way she'd looked at him like she could see past all the careful professionalism to something more genuine underneath. He told him about her laugh and her silver hair and the way she'd called him handsome like it was the most natural thing in the world. And she's definitely 62, David asked when Marcus finished. She said 62 as of last month, huh? David leaned back in his desk chair, a piece of furniture that had seen better decades and made concerning creaking sounds whenever he moved. Well, stranger things have happened, have they? Probably not, David admitted. But that doesn't. I mean, this is a bad thing. When's the last time you were excited about meeting someone again? Marcus thought about it and realized he couldn't remember. Even with Sharon, their second date had felt more like a logical next step than something he was genuinely looking forward to. It's been a while. Then maybe age is just a number, David said. Or maybe you're having some kind of midlife crisis, and I should be more concerned. Either way, I'm curious to see how this plays out. She'll be at the coffee shop again on Thursday, Marcus said, then immediately felt foolish for sharing such a specific detail. Thursday, huh? That's only 2 days away? Think you can manage to not overthink this for 48 hours? Looked at his computer screen, where he had 3 different project timelines open and a dozen emails that needed responses. His calendar showed back-to-back meetings for the rest of the week, a site visit on Thursday afternoon, and a presentation. To prepare for the following Monday, his normal self would spend the next 2 days buried in work, thinking about load-bearing walls and sustainable building materials and whether the city planning committee would approve their latest proposal. But for some reason, all he could think about was Thursday at 8:15 and whether Elena would be wearing those purple sneakers again. Probably not, he admitted. David grinned. Good. It's about time something interesting happened around here. Thursday morning came with the kind of drizzle that Seattle residents had learned to ignore. But Marcus found himself checking the weather app on his phone every 15 minutes, as if the forecast might somehow change his plans. He'd barely slept, his mind cycling between excitement and a creeping sense of absurdity. What was he doing? He was a grown man getting worked up about maybe seeing a woman he'd talked to for 10 minutes. By 7:45, he was dressed in what David would later tease him about calling his casual but thoughtful outfit, dark jeans instead of his usual khakis, a navy sweater that his sister Claire had bought him for Christmas, and the leather jacket he normally saved for weekend gallery openings. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and had the uncomfortable realization that he was nervous in a way he hadn't been since college. The coffee shop was more crowded than usual when he arrived at exactly 8:10. Marcus's usual table was occupied by a couple sharing a breakfast pastry and what appeared to be wedding planning documents spread across every available surface. He felt a moment of panic. What if Alina was already there and couldn't find her usual spot? What if she thought he wasn't coming and left? Then he saw her, sitting at a small table near the window, and the relief was so immediate and intense that it caught him off guard. She was wearing dark jeans, a cream-colored cable-knit sweater, and yes, purple sneakers. Today's book was Cosmos by Carl Sagan, and she had a small notebook beside her cup where she was writing in what looked like careful cursive. Marcus ordered his usual black coffee. Out how to approach her without seeming like he'd been planning this encounter for the past 48 hours. Which of course he had. Alina solved his dilemma by looking up and catching his eye. Her smile was immediate and genuine, and she gestured to the empty chair across from her. Well, look who learned to slow down. I'm a quick study, Marcus said, settling into the chair and immediately feeling some of his nervousness fade. There was something about Elena's presence that made pretense seem unnecessary. Carl Sagan today, he observed, nodding toward her. Book a classic, Elena said, closing the cover, but keeping her place with a coffee-stained bookmark. Sometimes you need to zoom out and think about the bigger picture. Plus, his writing has this wonderful quality of making you feel both infinitely small and incredibly significant at the same time. Marcus found himself leaning forward slightly. That's an interesting way to put it. You sound surprised? I guess. I am. Most people I know don't think about feeling infinitely small as a positive thing. Lena tilted her head, studying him with those honey-colored eyes. What do most people you know think about? The question was simple enough, but it made Marcus pause. What did the people in his life think about? David thought about structural engineering and whether their latest intern was going to work out. His clients thought about square footage, and budgets and timelines. His sister thought about her kids' soccer schedules and her husband's promotion prospects. His neighbors thought about property values and the noise from the construction project 2 blocks over. Practical things, mostly, he said finally. Work schedules, problems that need solving. And you? What do you think about when you're not thinking about practical things? Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd thought about anything that wasn't practical. Even his hobbies, weekend bike rides, the occasional museum visit, reading architecture journals, felt more like maintenance activities than genuine interests. I'm starting to think I've forgotten how to think about impractical things, he admitted. Elena's expression softened. That's sadder than you probably realize. Thanks for the honesty. I'm 62 years old, Marcus. Stop sugarcoating. Things somewhere around 55. Life's too short to pretend everything is fine when it's not. There was something in her tone that made Marcus look at her more carefully. Speaking from experience, Alina was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. I spent 35 years married to a man who thought about practical things. Don't get me wrong, Roberto was a good man, a good provider, a good father to our children. But somewhere along the way, we stopped wondering about anything that couldn't be solved with a spreadsheet or a carefully planned budget. What happened? He died, Alina said simply. Heart attack at 58, right there in our kitchen while he was calculating how much we needed to save for our grandson's college fund. The last conversation we had was about whether we should refinance the mortgage. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for me, Alina said, her voice gentle but firm. Be sorry for him. He was so busy planning for a future that never came that he forgot to live in the present he actually had. The weight of her words settled between them and Marcus. Found himself thinking about his own carefully planned life, his 5-year business plan, his retirement savings, his calendar blocked out in efficient 15-minute increments. When was the last time he'd done something spontaneous? When was the last time he'd felt truly alive instead of just productively busy? Is that why you read Carl Sagan for fun? He asked. Alina smiled, and some of the sadness left her eyes. Partly. But mostly I read him because he reminds me that we're all made of star stuff, and that's too amazing to take for granted. Star stuff? Every atom in your body was forged in the heart of a dying star, Alina said, her voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing a favorite piece of poetry. It's the calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the carbon in your DNA. All of it was created billions of years ago, in stellar furnaces and scattered across the universe when those stars exploded. You are literally made of the cosmos. Marcus found himself staring at her. That's mind-bending? Overwhelming? Completely insane to think about while drinking coffee on a Thursday morning? Beautiful, Marcus said, surprising himself with the word choice. It's beautiful. Elena's smile was radiant. Yes, it is. And that's exactly the kind of impractical thinking you need more of in your life. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Marcus processing this conversation that was unlike any he'd had in recent memory. Around them, the coffee shop hummed. With the usual morning energy, business calls, laptop keyboards clicking, the hiss of the espresso machine. But their little corner felt separate somehow, insulated from the practical concerns of the outside world. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. You can ask me anything. Yesterday when I said you couldn't be 60, was that offensive? I've been worried that I insulted you. Alina laughed, a sound that made several other customers look over with unconscious smiles. Marcus, at my age, being told I look younger than I am, is about as far from an insult as you can get. Though I have to ask, what made you think I couldn't be 60? Marcus felt himself blushing again. You just seem so ... alive. Engaged. Most 60-year-olds I know are thinking about retirement and grandchildren and slowing down. You're reading quantum physics and wearing purple sneakers like you're ready to take on the world. Maybe that says more about the 60-year-olds you know than it does about me, Elena suggested. Age is just biology, Marcus. How you choose to live is psychology. Is that from Carl Sagan too? No, that's from Elena Vasquez, who spent way too many years living according to other people's expectations about what a woman her age should want. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her face. What do you want? The question seemed to catch Elena off guard. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the window where the Seattle drizzle was painting abstract patterns on the glass. I want to feel curious about things again, she said finally. I want to have conversations that make me think differently about the world. I want to wear purple sneakers if they make me happy, and read difficult books because they stretch my brain, and maybe... ... double quotes. She paused, looking directly at him. Maybe I want to have coffee with a handsome architect who's forgotten how to think about impractical things. Marcus felt his heart rate increase in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. Even though I'm 20 years younger than you? Especially because you're 20 years younger than me, Elena said. Do you know what's wonderful about that age gap? It means you're old enough to have interesting thoughts and young enough to still change your mind about things. It's a powerful combination. And you don't think people would find it strange? A 62-year-old woman and a 43-year-old man having coffee together? Elena's expression grew serious. Marcus, I've buried a husband, raised 3 children, survived cancer, started my own business, and learned to speak 4 languages. I've been judged for being too young, too old, too ambitious, too quiet, too independent, and too traditional. At this point in my life, I'm much more concerned with what makes me happy than what makes other people comfortable. The directness of her response left Marcus momentarily speechless. In his professional life, he was used to confidence, making presentations, defending design choices, negotiating contracts. But Elena's kind of confidence was different. It wasn't about convincing anyone of anything. It was simply about knowing who she was and being comfortable with that knowledge. You said you survived cancer, Marcus said carefully. Breast cancer 7 years ago. Caught it early, had surgery, did the treatments. I'm fine now. Tone was matter of fact, but Marcus caught something underneath it. Going through that experience has a way of clarifying what's actually important, which is time, Alina said without hesitation. Not having time, not saving time, not managing time more efficiently, just time itself. It's the actual moments when you're fully present for your own life. Marcus thought about his morning routine, his scheduled workouts, his carefully planned weekend activities. How much of his time was he actually present for? And how much was he just checking off boxes on an invisible list of things productive adults were supposed to do? When was the last time you were fully present for your own life? Alina asked, as if reading his thoughts. The question hit him like a physical blow. Marcus tried to think of a recent moment when he'd been completely absorbed in the present, not thinking about the next task or the previous meeting or the problem he needed to solve. The silence stretched between them as he searched his memory.
I
Can't remember, he finally admitted. That's what I thought. Elena's voice was kind but sad. You have the look of someone who's been on autopilot for a while? Is it that obvious to me? Yes.
ass.
But I have the advantage of having lived through my own version of autopilot. The good news is, it's reversible. How? Elena smiled. Start small. Pay attention to one thing today that you normally wouldn't notice. Really look at it. Think about it. Let yourself be curious about it. Like what? Anything. It's the way light falls across that wall over there. It's a sound the espresso machine makes. The fact that we're two people who didn't know each other existed a week ago, sitting here talking about star stuff and the nature of time. Lena paused, then added, the way you smile when you're not thinking about smiling. Marcus became immediately self-conscious about his expression. I wasn't aware I had different kinds of smiles. Most people do. There's the professional smile, the polite smile, the I'm listening but thinking about something else smile. And then there's the real one, which is what happens when you forget to control your face. And which one am I doing now? The real one, Alina said. And Marcus felt something warm unfold in his chest. His phone buzzed with a text message, and Marcus glanced at it reflexively. David reminding him about the site visit that afternoon and asking if he'd reviewed the contractor's latest proposal. The practical world was calling, full of schedules and deadlines and problems that needed solving. You have to go, Alina observed. Not yet, Marcus said, turning the phone face down on the table. Tell me about your business. You mentioned you started your own company. Elena's face lit up. I'm a translator. I work with authors who want their books published in different languages, and with publishers who want to bring international literature to English-speaking audiences. That's incredible. How many languages? Do you speak fluently? Spanish, English, Portuguese, and Italian? I can muddle through French when I have to, and I'm learning Mandarin because I like the challenge. Marcus stared at her. You're learning Mandarin at 62? I started when I was 60. Roberto always said I was too old to pick up new languages, that it was a waste of time at my age. Turns out he was wrong about a lot of things. There was an edge to her voice when she mentioned her late husband, something that made Marcus think their marriage had been more complicated than she'd initially let on. What made you want to become a translator? Books, Alina said simply. I've always believed that stories are how we understand each other across cultures, across time, across all the things that seem to divide us. When I translate a novel from Spanish to English, I'm not just changing words, I'm building a bridge between two ways of seeing the world. That's beautiful. It's also practical, Alina said with a grin. Turns out there's good money in helping. People understand each other, Marcus laughed. It's the best of both worlds. Exactly. Though I have to admit, the practical part is mostly what pays for my coffee habit and my book collection. How many books do you own? Stop counting at 3,000, Elena said. My children think I have a hoarding problem, but I prefer to. Think of it as maintaining a personal library. It's 3,000 books, give or take a few hundred. Roberto used to complain about the space they took up, all those shelves covering the walls. He wanted me to get rid of them, switch to digital reading, to declutter our living space. Elena's fingers made air quotes around the phrase. I told him that books weren't clutter. They were proof of all the worlds I'd visited and all the people I'd met without leaving the house. Marcus tried to imagine living with someone who saw books as clutter rather than treasure. His own apartment had maybe 50 books, mostly architecture journals and coffee table volumes about famous buildings. Elena's 3,000 books represented 3,000 different conversations, 3,000 opportunities to see the world through someone else's eyes. "I'd like to see your library sometime," he said, then immediately realized how forward that sounded. "I mean, if you ever want to show someone who appreciates books." Elena's smile was knowing but not unkind. "I'd like that too, though I should warn you, once you see 3,000 books in one space, it either inspires you to read more or makes you feel completely overwhelmed by how much there is to know." "Which reaction did you have?" "Inspired, obviously. Otherwise I would have stopped at book number 50. Marcus's phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. David was calling now, which meant the site visit was probably more urgent than he'd initially thought. "I really do have to go this time," Marcus said reluctantly. "Of course you do. The world of sustainable design solutions awaits." Marcus stood, gathering his jacket and messenger bag, but hesitated before leaving Alina. "Yes. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that's not a coffee shop, where we can talk about impractical things without worrying about the morning rush?" Elena's smile was answer enough, but she said, "I'd love that. Though I should warn you, I'm probably going to order wine and ask you uncomfortable questions about what makes you happy." "I'm looking forward to both of those things," Marcus said, and realized he meant it completely. "Saturday night?"
Saturday
"Night," Marcus agreed. "I'll pick you up at 7. "Actually," Alina said, pulling a business card from her purse and writing something on the back, "why don't you meet me here?" She handed him the card, which had her address written in elegant cursive. "I live in Capitol Hill, and there's a wonderful little Italian place 2 blocks from my house. We can walk there, and afterward I can show you what 3,000 books looks like." Marcus looked at the address and felt his pulse quicken. "That sounds perfect," will be, Alina said with the kind of confidence that made Marcus believe her completely. Walking back to his office, Marcus felt like he was seeing Seattle with different eyes. The rain-slick streets looked more vivid somehow, the gray sky more dramatic than depressing. He found himself noticing things he normally hurried past, the way the neon signs reflected in puddles, the architectural details on buildings he'd walked by hundreds of times, and the fact that people on the street seemed to be having more interesting conversations than he'd realized by the time he reached his office. Marcus was 15 minutes late for his meeting with David, but for the first time in years, he didn't care. Saturday evening found Marcus standing in front of his closet for the 3rd time in an hour, holding 2 different shirts and wondering when he'd become the kind of person who agonized over wardrobe choices. His reflection in the mirror showed a man who looked nervous in a way that was both unfamiliar and oddly exhilarating. Capitol Hill on a Saturday. Night was alive with energy. Street musicians played on corners, couples walked hand in hand toward restaurants with glowing windows. The whole neighborhood hummed with the kind of vibrant urban life that Marcus usually observed from a distance. He found Elena's address easily, a charming brick townhouse with window boxes full of herbs and a front door painted deep turquoise. Before he could knock, the door opened, and Alina appeared wearing a flowing black dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and effortless. Her silver hair was loose around her shoulders, and she'd traded the purple sneakers for black boots with just enough heels to make her nearly his height. "Look beautiful," Marcus said, the words coming out more breathless than he'd intended. "You," Alina replied, her smile warm and self-assured.
Oh.
"You clean up pretty well yourself." She grabbed a lightweight jacket and a small purse, then locked the door behind her. "Ready for an adventure?"
What?
"What kind of adventure?" "The kind where we walk 4 blocks through one of Seattle's most interesting neighborhoods, to eat food that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about Italian cuisine." The restaurant Alina had chosen was exactly the type of place Marcus would never have found on his own. Tucked between a vintage bookstore and a shop that seemed to sell nothing but unusual houseplants. The exterior was unremarkable, but when they stepped inside, Marcus was immediately enveloped by warmth. The scent of garlic and herbs, the sound of animated conversations in what sounded like at least 3 different languages. Alina. A woman with graying curls and paint-stained fingers appeared from behind the host stand, embracing Alina like an old friend. "And this must be the architect you mentioned?" Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. Alina had mentioned him to other people. Marcus, this is Sofia Benedetti. She owns this place with her husband Giuseppe, and she makes the best osso buco, north of Tuscany. Sofia looked Marcus up and down with the frank assessment of someone who'd been sizing up people for decades.
Handsome,
She announced in accented English. Good shoulders, kind eyes. Alina has excellent taste. Sofia, Alina said, laughing, you're going to scare him away. If he scares that easily, he's not worthy of you anyway, Sofia replied with a dismissive wave. Come, I have your usual table. They were led to a small table near a window overlooking a tiny garden lit with string lights. The table was set with mismatched plates and worn silverware that somehow felt more elegant than any formal place setting Marcus had ever seen. Your usual table? Marcus asked, as they settled into their seats. I've been coming here for 3 years, Alina explained. After Roberto died, I went through a phase where I couldn't bear to cook for just myself. Sofia and Giuseppe basically adopted me, made sure I ate actual meals instead of living on coffee and toast. Marcus tried to imagine Alina in that vulnerable state, grieving and alone, finding comfort in this warm restaurant with its kind owners that was thoughtful of them. Italians don't let people starve, especially not people who are grieving. It's against their religion. Alina's tone was light, but Marcus caught the deeper emotion underneath. They probably saved my life that first year. Before Marcus could respond, Sofia reappeared with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Chianti Classico 2018, she announced, pouring generous portions without asking if they wanted any. Giuseppe selected it specifically for tonight. We didn't order wine yet, Marcus pointed out gently. Sofia looked at him like he'd said something adorable but slightly stupid. You don't order wine here? Can you give you wine that goes with the food we're making for you? This is not an Olive Garden, Alina was trying not to laugh. Sofia, maybe you should explain how this works. Simple, Sofia said, pulling up a chair and sitting down uninvited. We make food that is good for your soul. You eat it. You drink wine. You talk about important things. You fall more in love with each other than you were when you walked in. Then you come back next week and do it again. Marcus nearly choked on his wine. Did you just say fall more in love? Yes, Sofia confirmed matter-of-factly. Alina told me about you, architect very serious. Forgot how to have fun. She likes you, you like her. Age is just a number. What is complicated about this? Marcus looked at Alina, who was now openly laughing. Did you really tell her all that? May have mentioned that I'd met someone interesting, Alina admitted, her cheeks slightly pink. Interesting? Sofia snorted. She called you intellectually stimulating and surprisingly attractive for someone who thinks too much. I wrote it down because it was such an unusual combination of compliments, Sofia, Alina said, her voice carrying a warning that was undermined by her obvious amusement. What? I am old. I am allowed to say what I think. Sofia stood up, smoothing her apron. Giuseppe is making risotto with wild mushrooms, followed by braised short ribs with polenta. If you don't like it, you have no taste, and Alina should find someone better. She disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving Marcus and Alina alone. With their wine and the sound of Marcus's nervous laughter, I apologize for Sofia, Alina said. She has no filter, but she means well. Don't apologize. I like her, though I have to ask. Did you really describe me as surprisingly attractive for someone who thinks too much? Alina took a sip of wine. Considering her response, I may have said something along those lines. What does that even mean? It means, Alina said, leaning forward slightly, that usually when I meet men who are obviously intelligent and professionally successful, they're either completely boring or so in love with their own brilliance that there's no room for anyone else in the conversation. You're neither of those things. Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the wine. What am I then? You're someone who thinks deeply about things, but hasn't forgotten how to be surprised? That's rarer than you might imagine. Their conversation was interrupted by Sofia's return with the first course, the promised risotto, which arrived in bowls that looked handmade and smelled like heaven. The first bite made Marcus close his eyes involuntarily. Good, Alina asked, smiling at his expression. I think I understand why you became a regular here. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that felt companionable rather than awkward. Around them, the restaurant hummed with conversation and laughter, creating a bubble of intimacy at their small table. Can I ask you something? Marcus said finally. Always? When you were married to Roberto, were you happy? Lena set down her fork and considered the question seriously. I was content, she said finally. For a long time, I thought that was the same. Thing is happy. Roberto was a good man, a reliable man. He provided for our family. He never cheated. He never raised his voice. He was exactly the kind of husband my mother told me I should want. But somewhere along the way I realized that being grateful for someone's goodness isn't the same as being excited to see them at the end of the day. Elena's voice was thoughtful, not bitter. We built a life together, raised 3 wonderful children, and created a comfortable home. But we stopped seeing each other as individuals somewhere around year 15. It became roles: husband, wife, mother, father, breadwinner, homemaker. Marcus thought about his own relationship history, the women he'd dated who'd felt more like suitable life partners than actual companions. Did you ever talk to him about it? I tried, once. About 10 years ago, I suggested we take a trip together, just the 2 of us. Maybe Italy, since we'd never been, and I was interested in the language. Roberto said it was impractical. We had the house, the kids' college funds to think about, his business to run. He suggested we wait until retirement. What did you say? Said retirement was 15 years away, and what if we didn't make it that long? What if one of us got sick, or died, or simply woke up one day and realized we'd spent our entire lives waiting for the right time to actually live? Elena's smile was sad. He told me I was being dramatic and morbid, and that planning for the future was what responsible adults did. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had a heart attack at 58. 3 years after that conversation, we never made it to Italy. Elena took a sip of wine. The worst part is, he died still believing he was doing the right thing, still planning for a future that never came. Sophia appeared with the second course, setting down plates of short ribs that looked like a work of art. Everything okay here? You both look too serious for people eating Giuseppe's cooking. We're fine, Sophia, Elena assured her. Just having one of those conversations? Sophia nodded knowingly. The heavy ones. Good. People who only talk about light things are boring in bed. She walked away before either of them could respond, leaving Marcus speechless and Elena shaking with suppressed laughter. I think she just gave us a relationship. Advice, Marcus managed. Sophia has very strong opinions about relationships. She and Giuseppe have been married for 42 years, and they still flirt like teenagers. Is that what you want? That kind of marriage? Elena looked at him directly. I want to be with someone who sees me as a person, not a role. Someone who wants to explore the world with me instead of hiding from it. Someone who thinks growing older means getting more interesting, not less adventurous. The weight of her words settled between them, and Marcus found himself thinking about what kind of partner he'd been in the past, what kind he wanted to be in the future. What about you? Elena asked. Have you ever been married? Once, Jennifer. We divorced 4 years ago. What happened? Marcus cut a piece of the short rib, buying himself time to think. We wanted different things. Or maybe we wanted the same things, but couldn't figure out how to want them together. What did she want? Stability, security, a husband who came home at 6:30 every night and didn't bring work stress to the dinner table. Someone who would plan family vacations to predictable places and save for retirement. And buy a house in the suburbs with good schools for the kids we were going to have someday. And what did you want? Marcus realized he'd never articulated this clearly, even to himself. I wanted to matter. It's not just as a provider or a partner, but as a person. I wanted someone who was interested in my thoughts about things that weren't practical. I wanted to feel like I was more than just a functional adult playing my assigned role. Elena nodded slowly. We both married people who wanted us to be smaller than we actually were. How do you mean? Roberto wanted me to be content with being a wife and mother, to find all my fulfillment in taking care of other people. Sounds like Jennifer wanted you to be content with being a provider and protector, to find all your fulfillment in creating security for your family. Neither of them wanted the full-sized versions of who we actually are. Marcus had never thought about it that way, but Elena was right. Jennifer had loved his ambition when it meant financial security, but found it tiresome when it meant late nights working on design problems that excited him. She'd wanted the benefits of his intelligence, but not the inconvenience of his curiosity. "That why you think this could work?" Marcus asked. "'Cause we're both looking for someone who wants the full-sized version?" "Partly," Elena said. "But also because I think we're both finally old enough to know who we actually are instead of who we think we're supposed to be." They were interrupted by Giuseppe himself emerging from the kitchen, a bear of a man with flour-dusted hands and a smile that transformed his entire face when he saw Elena. "Elena Bella," exclaimed, kissing both her cheeks. "And this is the architect who has captured your attention?" "Yes." "Giuseppe, this is Marcus," Elena said. "Marcus, this is the genius responsible for the incredible food we've been eating." Giuseppe studied Marcus with the same frank assessment his wife had employed. "Earlier you make her laugh. I try to," Marcus said. "Good. Elena has not laughed enough in recent years." "A woman like this should laugh every day." Giuseppe turned to Elena. "He treats you well." "We've only just started getting to know each other," Elena replied diplomatically. "Time doesn't matter," Giuseppe said with a dismissive wave. "Sophia and I knew we would marry after one conversation. 42 years later, we still have new things to talk about. Quality, not quantity." He disappeared back into the kitchen as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving Marcus feeling like he'd just passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. "Are all your friends this direct?" Marcus asked. "The good ones are," Lena replied. "At my age, I don't have time for people who aren't honest about what they think and feel." They finished their meal as the restaurant gradually emptied around them, their conversation ranging from Elena's children, a daughter who was a doctor in Portland, twin sons who were teachers in San Francisco and Denver, to Marcus's architectural philosophy, sustainable design that honored both environmental needs and human psychology, to their shared love of science fiction novels. When Sophia brought them tiramisu they hadn't ordered, along with espresso that was strong enough to wake the dead, Marcus realized they'd been talking for nearly 3 hours without a single lull in conversation. "I should probably pay for this incredible meal," Marcus said as they finished the last bites of dessert. "Already taken care of," Sophia announced, appearing beside their table again. "Giuseppe's gift to the new couple," or not, Marcus started. "To protest, you will be," Sophia said with absolute certainty. "Some things are obvious to anyone with eyes, Elena. Take him to see your books now. Men need to understand what kind of mind they're dealing with." Outside, the night air was crisp and clear, unusual for Seattle in any season. As they walked the 4 blocks back to Elena's townhouse, Marcus found himself hyper-aware of everything, the way Elena's hand occasionally brushed his as they walked, the sound of their footsteps on the sidewalk, the way the streetlights caught, the silver in her hair. "Ready to see what 3,000 books looks like?" Elena asked as they reached her front door. "I've been curious about that since Thursday," Marcus admitted. Elena unlocked the door and led him into a small foyer that opened into a living room that made Marcus's breath catch. Every wall was lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves, and every shelf was packed with books. But it didn't feel cluttered or overwhelming. It felt like stepping into a library that had been designed for comfort rather than efficiency. "My God," Marcus said softly, turning slowly to take it all in. "Too much?" Elena asked, watching his face carefully. "It's incredible. It's like being inside someone's mind." Elena's smile was radiant. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Standing in Elena's living room, Marcus felt like an explorer who'd stumbled upon a hidden civilization. The books weren't just stored on shelves, they were organized in a way that suggested deep thought and personal connection. Fiction in multiple languages occupied one wall, with sections clearly devoted to Latin American magical realism, Italian contemporary literature, and what appeared to be an extensive collection of science fiction spanning decades. Another wall held nonfiction, philosophy, physics, linguistics, art history, and memoirs by people Marcus had never heard of, but whose faces gazed confidently from book spines. "How do you find anything?" Marcus asked, running his fingers along a shelf of poetry collections. "The same way you find your way around a city you love," Alina replied, settling into a well-worn leather armchair that looked like it had been positioned for optimal reading light. "After a while, you just know where everything is. That shelf there is Russian literature, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, but also contemporary authors like Ludmila Ulitskaya and Viktor Pelevin. The shelf below it is entirely devoted to books about you, language and translation theory." Marcus pulled out a slim volume titled The Task of the Translator by Walter Benjamin. The pages were filled with careful marginalia in Elena's handwriting, notes that showed she'd been in deep conversation with the text. "You write in your books," he observed. "Of course I do. Books aren't museum pieces. They're meant to be lived with, argued with, marked up with thoughts and reactions. Roberto always hated that I wrote in books, said it diminished their resale value." Marcus looked up from the Benjamin volume. "Did you ever plan to resell them?" "Never." "But Roberto saw everything in terms of future utility. Even our conversations toward the end felt like he was calculating their practical value." Elena's voice carried a note of old sadness. "I think that's why he never understood my work as a translator. He saw it as playing with words instead of doing something useful." "Translation is incredibly useful," Marcus said, genuinely surprised. "You're literally making it possible for people to access ideas they couldn't reach otherwise." Elena's expression brightened. "Exactly. Last month I finished translating a novel by a Colombian writer named Esperanza Martinez. It's about 3 generations of women living through political upheaval and the way memory shapes how we survive trauma. The English-speaking world would never have access to that story without translators." Marcus replaced the Benjamin book and moved to another section where he found titles in languages he couldn't identify. "What's this one?" he asked, pointing to a book with what looked like Arabic script. "It's Farsi, Persian poetry by Rumi. I can't read it fluently, but I collect different translations to see how various translators interpret the same mystical concepts." Alina joined him at the shelf, standing close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and warm. "This edition is translated by Coleman Barks, this one by Joeid Majadidi. Same poems, completely different voices in English. One do you prefer?" "Both. Neither. That's the beautiful frustration of translation. Every version reveals something different about the original, while also concealing other aspects. It's like looking at a sculpture from different angles. Each perspective shows you something true, but no single view shows you everything." Marcus found himself staring at her profile as she spoke, noting the passion that animated her features when she talked about something she cared about. "Is that what drew you to translation? The challenge of the impossible task?" Lena turned to face him, and suddenly they were standing very close in the narrow space between bookshelves. "Partly, but mostly, it was the realization that I could spend my entire life facilitating conversations between people who would never otherwise understand each other. There's something magical about that. The air between them seemed charged with something Marcus couldn't quite name. He was acutely aware of Elena's proximity. The way she was looking at him with those honey-colored eyes. The fact that they were alone in her home, surrounded by thousands of books, like an intellectual fortress against the outside world. "Marcus," Elena said softly. "Yes. I'm going to kiss you now, unless you have any objections." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "No objections," he managed. Elena's kiss was gentle, but sure, her hands coming up to rest lightly on his chest. Marcus had been kissed before, obviously, but never with such intentionality, such presence. When they separated, Elena was smiling. "That was nice," she said, as if she'd just commented on the weather. "Nice," Marcus repeated, slightly breathless. "Very nice," Elena corrected, laughing at his expression. "Though I should probably mention that my upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chen, no relation to you? Different spelling, has excellent hearing, and tends to bang on the walls if things get too enthusiastic too late in the evening." Marcus glanced toward the ceiling. "At what time does she consider too late?" "Well, it's only 9:30 now, so we have some flexibility," Elena said, her eyes sparkling with mischief, before Marcus could fully process the implications of that statement. Elena had taken his hand and was leading him toward a staircase he hadn't noticed before. "Let me show you the upstairs library." It's where I keep the really interesting books. The second floor of Elena's townhouse had been converted into what could only be described as a private study. Unlike the organized chaos of the downstairs library, this space felt more intimate, more personal. A large desk sat near the window, covered with manuscripts, dictionaries, and what appeared to be works in progress. The bookshelves here were dedicated to languages and linguistics, the entire sections devoted to etymology, syntax, and the history of translation. "This is where you work," Marcus observed. "This is where I live," Elena corrected. "It's the downstairs. Is for reading pleasure. This is where I wrestle with impossible sentences and try to capture the untranslatable." Marcus examined the desk more closely. Several books lay open, marked with sticky notes and surrounded by handwritten pages covered. In Elena's careful script, "What are you working on now?" Memoir by a Spanish Civil War survivor who didn't write about her experiences until she was 93. It's heartbreaking and beautiful, and absolutely crucial that it exists in English. Elena picked up one of the manuscripts, her fingers gentle on the pages. But some of her expressions don't have direct English equivalents. There's a phrase she uses, el dolor que no se nombra, which literally means the pain that isn't named. But she's referring to a very specific kind of grief that can only be felt by people who've lost their homeland. How do you translate? Something like that? Very carefully and with lots of footnotes, Elena said. Sometimes you have to expand a single phrase into a sentence, or find an English metaphor that captures the emotional weight, even if it changes the literal meaning. Marcus was struck by the intellectual complexity of Elena's work, the careful balance between precision and interpretation that each translation required. It must be incredibly challenging. It is. But it's also deeply satisfying to know that I'm helping preserve stories that might otherwise be lost. Elena set the manuscript down and turned to face him. Though I have to admit, it can be lonely work. It's nice to have someone to talk to about it who actually listens. They were standing close again, and Marcus found himself studying Elena's face in the soft light from the desk lamp. Is that what you meant earlier? About wanting someone who sees you as a person instead of a role? Among other things, Elena said, reaching up to touch his face gently. Roberto saw my translation work as a hobby, something to keep me busy, but not really important. Introduced me to people as his wife, occasionally as the mother of his children, but never as a translator or a linguist. After a while, I started to forget that those parts of me existed. Marcus thought about Jennifer, who had been proud of his professional success, but impatient with his tendency to get excited about architectural theory or spend weekends visiting buildings that inspired him. Jennifer used to say I thought too. Much about things that didn't matter. What kind of things? The way light moves through a space during different seasons? How the materials in a building affect the way people feel when they're inside it? Whether a structure is in harmony with its environment or fighting against it? Marcus paused, realizing he was revealing more about himself than he usually did. She said those weren't practical concerns for someone trying to run a business. Elena's expression grew soft. Those sound like exactly the kinds of things that separate good architecture from great architecture. That's what I always thought, but after hearing that I was being impractical often enough, I started to wonder if she was right. She wasn't, Elena said firmly. The world has enough people who only think about practical things. We need more people who think about beauty, meaning, harmony, all the things that make life worth living instead of just survivable. Something loosened in Marcus's chest, a tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. You really believe that? I know that. Do you know how many books I've translated that were written by people who thought about impractical things? Poets, philosophers, novelists who spent their lives trying to capture something beautiful or true or important. The world is better because they existed, not because they were practical. Elena stepped closer, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. You're an architect who thinks about how buildings make people feel. That's not impractical. That's essential. When Elena kissed him this time, it was with more intensity, more urgency. Marcus felt something shift inside him. A recognition that this woman understood parts of him that he'd almost given up trying to explain to anyone. Her hands were in his hair, and he was pulling her closer. and the thousands of books surrounding them seemed to whisper approval of this. Connection between two people who'd finally found someone who spoke their language. They broke apart when they heard a distinct thump from above, followed by the sound of someone moving around with obvious irritation. Mrs. Chen, Alina said, laughing breathlessly. Right on schedule. Marcus glanced toward the ceiling. Does she always monitor your social life this closely? Only when I have male visitors, which hasn't happened in quite a while. Alina smoothed her hair and stepped back slightly, though she kept her hands on his arms. She's actually quite sweet. She brings me soup when I'm sick and keeps an eye on the house when I travel. But she has strong opinions about noise levels. Very strong opinions. An excellent hearing for someone in her 80s. Another thump from upstairs, more emphatic this time. Alina sighed. I think that's our cue to move this conversation back downstairs. They returned to the main library, where Alina poured them. Each a glass of wine from a bottle she produced from what Marcus was beginning to suspect was a very well-stocked kitchen. They settled on her couch, a comfortable piece of furniture that showed signs of being frequently used for reading. Can I ask you something? Marcus said, accepting the wine gratefully. Are you concerned about what people will think? About us, I mean. The age difference. Lena considered the question seriously. Are you? I should be, Marcus admitted. People notice everything, Marcus. They notice when you're too young, too. Old, too fat, too thin, too successful, not successful enough. You can't live your life based on what people might think, because they're always thinking about something. But it doesn't bother you at all? Alina took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. When I was your age, I probably would have been terrified of what people thought. I spent most of my marriage trying to be the kind of wife Roberta wanted. The kind of mother society expected. The kind of woman who didn't cause problems or ask for too much. She looked directly at him. Cancer has a way of clarifying your priorities. When you realize that your time is genuinely limited, you stop caring about anything except what makes you feel truly alive. And this makes you feel alive? Sitting here talking to you about books and translation and the way light moves through buildings? Having someone look at me like I'm fascinating instead of just functionally useful? Elena's smile was radiant. More alive than I've felt in years. Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a rightness that surprised him with its clarity. I feel the same way. Good, Elena said, curling up against his side in a gesture that felt both intimate and natural. Because I have a confession to make. What's that? I've been thinking about kissing you since Thursday morning. Marcus laughed, the sound echoing warmly in the book-lined room. Only since Thursday? Been thinking about it since you called me handsome in the coffee shop. Technically, I said you couldn't be that handsome, which is different. It's completely different. One is a compliment. The other is an observation about the unfairness of the universe. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Elena's head on Marcus's shoulder, both of them processing the shift that had occurred between them. Outside, Seattle continued its Saturday night bustle. But inside Elena's library, surrounded by thousands of stories about human connection and longing and the search for meaning, Marcus felt like he'd found something he hadn't even known. He hadn't even known he was looking for Alina, he said eventually. What happens now? Lena lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright with possibility. And we find out what it's like to be ourselves with someone who actually wants to know who that is. If it turns out we're incompatible in some fundamental way, then we'll have had some wonderful conversations and eaten some excellent food, and learned something important about what we actually want in a partner. Elena's expression grew more serious, but I don't think that's going to happen. Not because we've already spent more time talking about things that actually matter than most couples manage in months of dating, Because you kiss like someone who's genuinely happy to be kissing me specifically, not just happy to be kissing someone. And because, double quotes, she paused, seeming to weigh her words. Because what? Because when I look at you, I see someone I could grow with instead of someone I would have to shrink myself to accommodate. That's rarer than you might think. Marcus felt the truth of her words resonate somewhere deep in his chest. I see the same thing when I look at you. Elena smiled and settled back against his shoulder. Then I think we're going to be just fine. Above them, Mrs. Chen's footsteps moved across the floor in what sounded like a more satisfied pattern, as if she'd determined that the appropriate level of decorum was being maintained. I think Mrs. Chen approves of our current noise level, Marcus observed. Mrs. Chen approves of anything that makes me happy, Elena replied. She's been worried about me living alone for too long, and now? Now she's probably planning to interrogate you the next time she sees you leave here. Marcus considered this. Should I be concerned about that? Only if you're not serious about this, Elena said, her tone light, but with an undercurrent of something more substantial. Mrs. Chen has very strong opinions about men who waste women's time. I'm serious, Marcus said. Surprising himself with how quickly and definitely the words came out, Elena lifted her head again, studying his face. Are you really? Marcus thought about the question, about the evening they'd just shared, about the way Elena had looked when she talked about her work, about the kiss they'd shared surrounded by books, and the feeling that he'd found someone who understood parts of him he'd almost given up trying to explain. Yes, he said, I'm really serious. Elena's smile was like sunrise. Good, because I'm serious too, and I'm too old to pretend otherwise. Mrs. Chen's footsteps had quieted overhead. The house settled into the peaceful silence of a Saturday night well spent. Outside, Seattle sparkled with its usual urban energy. Inside Elena's library, Marcus felt like he'd found the center of something important, not just a relationship, but a way of being in the world that honored both intellectual curiosity and emotional connection. It was, he reflected, exactly the kind of impractical thing that made life worth living. 6 months later, Marcus stood in Elena's kitchen on a Sunday morning, making coffee while she sat at the breakfast table translating what appeared to be a particularly challenging passage from Portuguese. Her hair was still tousled from sleep. She was wearing one of his architecture conference t-shirts. And she had the intense concentration face that he'd learned meant she was wrestling with a word that had no English equivalent. So date again? He asked, setting a cup of coffee beside her manuscript. Worse. The author is describing the feeling you get when you're homesick for a place that never actually existed. A home you imagined as a child but never found. Lena looked up from her work, accepting the coffee gratefully. In Portuguese. She calls it saudade do impossible, but nostalgia for the impossible doesn't capture the weight of it in English. Marcus had learned not to offer solutions immediately when Elena encountered translation challenges. Instead, he sat across from her and waited. Watching her think through the problem with the same methodical approach she brought to everything important, maybe longing for an unlived life, she mused, making a note in the margin, or grief for dreams that were never real. No, that's too dramatic. These Sunday morning translation sessions had become one of Marcus's favorite parts of their routine. Elena would work for an hour while he made breakfast, occasionally reading passages aloud to test how they sounded in English. He'd discovered that listening to Elena work through language problems was like watching a master craftsperson at their trade precision. It's precision and artistry, all working together. How about yearning for a home that exists only in imagination? Marcus suggested flipping pancakes at the stove. Elena wrote down his suggestion, considered it, then smiled. It might actually work. You're getting good at this. I have an excellent teacher. Their relationship had developed its own rhythm over the past 6 months. A comfortable blend of intellectual connection and domestic intimacy that surprised Marcus with its naturalness. Elena spent Tuesday and Thursday nights at his apartment. In Belltown, where she'd gradually taken over a corner of his bookshelf with translation dictionaries and works in progress, Marcus spent most weekends at her place in Capitol Hill, where he'd installed better task lighting at her desk and learned to cook. Meals that wouldn't interrupt her concentration when she was deep in a particularly challenging project. The age. The difference that had initially seemed so significant had faded into irrelevance. Elena's energy and curiosity made her seem ageless, while Marcus found that her experience and perspective helped him see his own life more clearly. They complemented each other in ways that felt both surprising and inevitable. "Speaking of teaching," Elena said, closing her manuscript and giving him her full attention, "are you nervous about tomorrow?" Tomorrow was the presentation for Marcus's biggest project to date, a sustainable housing development that would incorporate green building techniques with affordable design principles. It was the kind of work he'd always wanted to do, but had never felt confident enough to pursue until Elena had started encouraging him to think beyond purely commercial projects. Terrified, Marcus admitted plating pancakes and joining her at the table, but also excited, which is new for me. "A brilliant project, Marcus. The planning committee would be crazy not to approve it." Housing development had been Elena's idea in a way. During one of their early conversations, she'd mentioned how difficult it was for artists and translators to find affordable housing. In Seattle, Marcus had started thinking about that challenge from an architectural perspective, eventually designing a mixed-use development that would provide affordable live-work spaces while meeting strict. "David thinks I'm crazy for taking on something this ambitious. David thinks anyone who prioritizes social impact over maximum profit is crazy. That doesn't make him right." Elena reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Besides, when do you care what David thinks about your personal projects?" She was right, of course. 6 months ago, Marcus would have been paralyzed by David's skepticism, worried about taking professional risks that might not pay off financially. Now, influenced by Elena's example of pursuing work that mattered regardless of external approval, he'd learned to trust his own judgment about what was worth doing. "Mrs. Chen wants to know if we're planning to get married," Elena said casually, cutting into her pancakes. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "She asked you that directly?" "She cornered me yesterday while I was checking the mail, apparently. Our arrangement has gone on long enough that she feels entitled to know our long-term intentions." They'd been living in what could generously be called a committed relationship for months now, but the topic of marriage hadn't come up directly. Marcus had been thinking about it, more than thinking about it. He was honest, but he hadn't been sure how Elena felt about making things official. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was between you and me, and that she should mind her own business." Elena's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Then she said that you seem like the marrying type, and I should be careful not to let a good man slip away." "The marrying type? Apparently you have what she calls husband energy. You fix things without being asked. You bring groceries without being reminded, and you make excellent coffee." Marcus laughed. "Those are Mrs. Chin's criteria for marriage material, among others. She also mentioned that you look at me like you're grateful I exist, which she says is important for long-term happiness." The conversation had taken on a weight that Marcus could feel settling between them. He looked at Elena across the breakfast table, her silver hair catching the morning light, her face completely free of makeup, wearing his old t-shirt like it belonged to her, and felt a certainty that surprised him with its clarity. "She's not wrong," he said quietly. "About the husband's energy? About being grateful you exist?" Elena's expression grew soft. "Marcus... I know it's only been 6 months. I know we're probably supposed to wait longer, be more practical about this. But I wake up every morning grateful that I get to know you. And I go to sleep every night hoping I get to keep knowing you for a very long time." Elena was quiet for a moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. "Are you asking what?" "I think you're asking..." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but also a strange calm, as if he'd finally arrived at a decision he'd been moving toward without realizing it. "I'm asking if you'd be interested in making this official. Marriage? Living together permanently? Combining our libraries into one spectacular collection that would probably require structural reinforcement." Elena's laugh was warm and surprising. "Are you proposing to me over pancakes on a Sunday morning? I'm considering it. Is that too unromantic?" "It's perfect," Elena said, her eyes bright with what looked suspiciously like tears. "Completely perfect for us. Is that a yes?" Elena stood up, came around the table, and settled into his lap with the natural ease of someone who'd done it hundreds of times before. "That's a yes to all of it. Marriage, cohabitation, and the library merger that Mrs. Chen will definitely have opinions about. When Marcus kissed her, he tasted coffee and maple syrup and the promise of a future that felt both practical and magical. Exactly the kind of contradiction he'd learned to expect from Elena Vasquez. Though I should warn you, Elena said, when they separated, once we're married, Mrs. Chen is going to start asking about grandchildren. Do we need to worry about that? Only if you're not prepared to explain to an 80-year-old Chinese woman why a 62-year-old bride and a 43-year-old groom are not planning to procreate. Marcus grinned. I'll leave that conversation to you. You're the one with experience in navigating cultural translation challenges. Very wise, Elena said, settling more comfortably against him. Oh, I should mention that my children are going to want to meet you properly now. Are you ready for that level of scrutiny? Marcus thought about Elena's 3 children, Maria, the doctor, and the twins, Carlos and Diego, who taught high school in different cities. He'd spoken to them briefly during video calls, but meeting them as Elena's fiancé would be a different kind of evaluation entirely. Are they going to grill me about my intentions extensively? But they're also going to love you, because you make me happy in a way I haven't been in years. Elena's expression grew more serious. They were worried about me after Roberto died, worried I'd spend the rest of my life alone with my books. They're going to be thrilled that I found someone who appreciates both my brain and my book collection. If they're not thrilled, then they'll learn to adjust, Elena said firmly. I didn't spend 62 years figuring out who I am to let other people's opinions change my mind about what makes me happy. Marcus marveled again at Elena's ability to know her own mind so clearly, to make decisions based on her own values rather than external expectations. It was a quality he was still learning from her, still practicing in his own life. I love you, he said, the words coming out naturally, without planning. I love you too, Elena replied. Even if you did just propose to me without a ring, we can fix that. We have time, Elena said, kissing him again. We have all the time in the world. Outside, Seattle woke up slowly around them, the city beginning another week of rain and possibility. But inside Elena's kitchen, surrounded by the quiet domesticity of Sunday morning and the promise of a shared future, Marcus felt like he'd finally found his way home, not to a place, but to a person who understood that the best relationships were built on curiosity, respect, and the willingness to keep learning about each other. Mrs. Chen's footsteps could be heard upstairs, beginning her own Sunday routine. By evening, Marcus was sure the entire building would know about their engagement. By the end of the week, Sophia and Giuseppe would be planning the reception menu. But for now, it was just the two of them, coffee growing cold on the table, planning a life together that would honor both practical concerns and impractical dreams. It was exactly the kind of beginning that Elena would have found impossible to translate into any language other than the one they'd created together. A language built on understanding, acceptance, and the radical act of seeing each other. Clearly, Marcus had been wrong about one thing, though. At 62 and 43, they didn't have all the time in the world. But they had enough time, and more importantly, they had learned how to be fully present for the time they did have. That, Lena would have said, was the only translation that truly mattered. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right? On your screen, if this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.